You can keep that song going. I like that one. All right, there we go. Turn it up. I don't know, you know Andre 3000, the performer of that song. He's actually a fellow water lover, turns out, and a turtle lover, which will be relevant shortly. Thanks for the great introduction, Kevin. Tom, thanks for putting together really a lovely program. You all are in for a treat the next few days. And Jackie, that was the most detailed, thorough, and inclusive introduction to a symposium I've ever heard in my life. I think that from the restrooms to what to do in case of cardiac arrest, I think is pretty impressive. And that says something about you, I think. This is a group of people who need to be thorough, detailed, on it, like no other, and inclusive, all at the same time, while having fun and seeming to be doing all of those things effortlessly. That's who you are. Your work is the front line of the best parts of people's lives. And you're opening the world, the water world, which is most of our planet, to children. Yet there's, the dangerous side that you need to be on top of, the health, the wellness, the safety of your clients. So that's who you are. And my goal in the next few minutes is to add a tool or two to your toolbox. You've got many tools. You'll be discussing many of them throughout the program. But I want to add some tools to your toolbox. To your personal toolbox that you use when you're in a quiet moment or with your family, but also your professional toolbox that you use at work with your team and with the general public and your clients. So if you need to get in touch on anything, if you want more details, you want a PDF related to any of the points I make, just get in touch. That's why I provide that information. If you use social media, that's one way to get in touch. But please, let's keep this conversation going. I was looking at the logo of this conference, and I kind of see the world through a watery lens like you do. And as you came in, you received a blue marble. I want to make sure everybody's got one. If you didn't get one, there should be one on your table. If there's not one on your table, raise your hand, and somebody will put a marble right into your hand almost immediately. So just keep your hands up. That blue sphere is reminiscent of another blue sphere that I think we're all familiar with, and that's the one here that we live on, called planet Earth. The first photograph of the whole planet by NASA astronauts is referred to as the blue marble. That's the most reproduced photograph of all time for one simple reason. It's a picture of us. It's our home, and we love our home. That photograph gets reproduced all over the place. There it is on the screen in composite. And that's what's hinted at by these blue marbles. And I share these blue marbles as just simple tokens of gratitude, small gesture to say thank you for what you do. And your homework assignment is to take those blue marbles and pass them on to somebody that you want to say thank you to. And you know who that person is, or you'll figure it out. Carry your blue marble and deliver it with the message of gratitude to somebody in your world, in your sphere, that needs a little boost, needs some thank you. Because I think gratitude is an underutilized tool in our toolbox. It's easy, it's free, and we don't use it nearly enough. But really, the core question here, and Jackie touched on it eloquently with a little bit of reminiscing about her water, is what is your water? When that question popped up, what was the first thing that you saw? What was the first waterway that you saw? Was it domestic? Was it wild? Was it indoor? Was it outdoor? Was it big? Was it small? Who were you with when you fell in love deeply for the first time with water? Were you alone? Did you have a guide? Did you have a loved one, a family member, perhaps a coach, some friends? What was the name of the water? Who were you with? And how did that feel? Because those questions are fundamental to why you're in this room today and what you're doing with your life. You're spending your lives around water, working for water, and working for people who need to connect with that water. Why are you doing that? Is it just a job, or is it something more? I'm going to guess the latter, that it's something more. Maybe your water experience early on was one that was very much about hydration and hygiene, the simple movement of water for life, to make life possible, to keep you hydrated, to keep your family hydrated, to keep you clean. Most of us take that for granted, but some of us have had that experience of where water was so precious and had to be moved long distances. Maybe your experience of water had to do with wildlife and being out there on the ocean, experiencing the wild world. Maybe you were submerged. Maybe that's the kind of image that came up, being completely underwater. This is one of my favorite photographs of all time by Brian Scarry, Face to Face. It's just a photograph that inspires awe and wonder. Maybe the water that came to mind was something a little different. You know, the water shooting out of a giant frog's head in a park, water splash park. Or maybe a reservoir. This is the reservoir above Louisville, Kentucky, that holds the water that they use in their homes and businesses. Beautiful spot. Maybe you thought of the frozen kind of water, also referred to as ice and snow, other names of water. Maybe it was a recreational activity, learning to surf, learning to swim, learning to paddle with friends and family. Maybe your thoughts of water take you to family, to that social time that we spend together, just hanging out, having good conversations in or near the water. Perhaps your water is rivers. And here's my book recommendation. If you haven't read Jim Harrison's The River Swimmer novella, jot that one down. It's a good read. The late Jim Harrison is a great writer. Maybe your water is something a little more domestic, like Jack Black. You know, his water is his favorite bathtub, where he likes to eat brunch with his puppy. For me, when I think of my water, I immediately think of my dad. He's the man who taught me to swim. He was my guide. He was my rock. He passed away this past April, and every time I see water, I think of him. Every time I get in the water, I think of him. Every time I take my kids in the water, and we do that, that turtle ride thing where the kids hold onto your shoulders and you dive under, take a big breath and then dive under. That's what I did with my dad. I just love that feeling of riding on his shoulders underwater, holding our breath, and then popping up for another and diving down. I remember Deep Lake in Wyoming, and the feeling of standing there by the lake and the grass between my toes, the smell of the air, the taste of the trout, and then the feeling of jumping off that rock right there into that cold water every morning. Just such vivid memories of water going all the way back. But at that age, I was kind of obsessed with sea turtles, and I don't have a photo of myself at that age with a turtle, so you kind of get the idea. I used to love to catch snapping turtles in the Chesapeake Bay and paint numbers on their shells, throw them back, and then keep track and sometimes recapture them, do the math. I love turtles, I love water, and I love math. So I ended up just kind of having a very turtle-centric view of the world. I'd see turtles kind of everywhere, in the carpet patterns, in the chandeliers, sometimes in the rocks. Some of your faces are rather turtly. You know who you are, and it's a good thing. I decided, because of this passion, this connection to water and wildlife, to become a marine biologist. And I spent 20 years studying sea turtles, and I'm not going to take this time to give you a lecture about sea turtles, except for one story. Back in 1996, 20 years ago, we put a satellite transmitter on this turtle here. Her name was Adelita. She was a 223-pound loggerhead sea turtle raised for 10 years in captivity. We convinced the people who had her in captivity to let her go. We had done the genetics on her, and we had some ideas about what she might do. Put the transmitter on her back and released her off the coast of Baja California. Well, that's the short video of her first days in the wild open ocean. And I'm letting that loop for one reason here. She gets released into the ocean. You'll see as it comes around again. Takes one little quick stroke and then pauses. There's a subtle pause. Watch, there's her stroke. And then there's this pause, boom. As if to say, where's the wall? There's been a wall right about here for 10 years. I mean, I'm making this up. I don't know what turtles think exactly and how they say it to themselves. But she'd become acclimated to living in a tank, being inside a wall environment. So much that her little turtle brain imagined a wall, and imagined it so well that it stopped her. She stopped swimming because she thought there was a wall. And then she started swimming again through the imaginary wall with confidence, and then she disappears into the blue. On the other side of that imaginary wall was the rest of her life. She had to swim through. She couldn't just stop and just stay there, afraid to swim through the imaginary wall. She had to keep moving. And what she did was she swam home. Turns out home was the other side of the planet for this turtle. She was born in Japan, raised in Mexico, and needed to go home. That's what turtles do. So she swam for 368 days, 7,000 miles across the North Pacific, all the way back to Japan, the place where she was born. We put her data on the internet, which was a relatively new technology back in 1996, and we were told that was scandalous. We shouldn't share our data in real time, but we did anyway. And millions of people tracked Adelita as she made her journey across the ocean. Every day, people logged in to see where Adelita was. 20 years later, we're still talking about her journey because she swam through that wall, that imaginary wall. Now, I'm not sharing turtle stories because I think turtle biology is extremely important for you today and for your work. I'm sharing it because it's a powerful metaphor for swimming through walls. But there's a highlight of the other day. My daughter came home from school, and she said, Dad, we just took the PSAT practice tests. You know, those every high school or college-bound high school student takes the SAT, and there's something called the PSAT practice test. And they have practice tests for the practice test, basically. So all high school students are practicing for the SAT. And there was an essay about Adelita on the practice test. 20 years later, the Adelita story is being taught to high school students across the country. That was my one brief 15 seconds of fame in my daughter's eyes. That was it. Back to Justin Bieber, and if you have teenage daughters or sons, you know what I'm talking about. That was it. They thought I was cool for 15 seconds. So what walls have you swum through? That's a personal question. And perhaps what is more important is what walls do you need to swim through? What are those imaginary walls that are holding you back from going home, from doing the things that you know need to happen? Your imagination is absolutely stunning and incredible. You can imagine great things. You can also imagine terrifying things, some of which do not exist. So how can we control and use our imaginations as a force for good rather than to create imaginary walls? For me, I started thinking about the brain on water, and that for me was a wall. My colleagues said, "Whoa, turtle boy, you have no business hanging out over with the neuroscientists. Go back and study turtles. That's your thing. Keep your career in the box. Don't go through that wall." But I decided I wanted to learn more about why being near, in, on, and water felt so good. So I started down that road. I started talking to neuroscientists and reading everything I could get my hands on. Turns out we are living in the golden age of neuroscience. This is a fantastic time to be alive because we're learning so much about our own brains. Our brains as a whole, different regions of our brains, but even down to the neuron. We used to understand the brain as a black box. You could study it only by stimulating it and then looking at the response. That was called psychology. But we really couldn't look inside that black box. But if you were to look inside the black box, it was typically after somebody was done using their brain. So, post-mortem. You could compare brain injuries and anomalies to human behavior after people were done using their brain. That's how neuroscience proceeded, by looking at these comparisons, comparing activity during life to anomalies only investigated after death. But that's all changed. We're living at a time where we can study our own brains while they're being used, while they're in motion, while they're active, while they're processing. And we can ask really interesting questions. We can measure the electricity, we can measure the oxygen flow, and we can tell more or less what's going on. Now, it's really the tip of the iceberg in terms of neuroscience research. There's so much more to be learned, and any good neuroscientist will tell you we know a lot closer to nothing than everything. But it's exciting, and it's really useful information. We're learning how the brain at rest and the brain in motion differ, and why that's important to living a good, healthy, productive life. This generation is the first to have what I call an owner's manual for the brain. Actually, there is one. Think about that. If you ever skip the owner's manual on anything, you eventually find yourself getting into trouble. Yeah, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Your clients, you send them owner's manuals to operate your equipment. They should read those owner's manuals, right? When they don't, that's when you get the emergency phone call. Like, turn to page 63, please, and reread that. Oh, you haven't read it? Okay, well, let's start there. Same thing with our own brain. The more we know about our brains, the better we are. Your brain, your owner's manual. For example, we can understand love, this world-changing driver of our activities we call love, in all its complexity, is something we can understand as scientists. That's really cool. I think it's really cool, and I geek out on this stuff. My wife, she doesn't think the neuroscience of romance is particularly sexy. I do. I find it absolutely gets my blood flowing, and it shuts her down immediately. When we talk about serotonin, oxytocin, when, like on Valentine's Day, not a good idea, really. Some of you are writing that down. I see that's maybe my most valuable advice of the day. Chemistry like oxytocin, neurochemicals that build trust. Oxytocin is implicated in the building of trust, the building of relationships, communication, holding us together. Right? We are in the business of oxytocin. Your pools boost oxytocin. Those experiences of people being together and playing and laughing boost oxytocin. What does that do for us? It brings us together. It builds trust. Now, these days, you can look at Scientific American and you'll even see meditation on the cover. The science of meditation. 10 years ago, that would be outrageous. The science of happiness, the science of meditation, even the science of stress. But nowadays, we're going there rigorously. Some of the best scientists in the world are studying things like happiness and meditation. You go to this section of the bookstore or the library, and you'll find endless numbers of books about your brain on magic. Your brain, magic, literally, illusionism, this neuroscience of being an illusionist. Your brain on creativity, your brain on music, and on and on. Really amazing time to be alive. These are all part of that owner's manual for your brain. But what you won't find, or at least not until Blue Mind came out, was a book about your brain on water. Seemed like a big miss. I wanted to read that book, but it wasn't available. I wanted to get some of those scientists to write it, but they didn't. So it came down to just doing it myself. So Turtle Guy writes a book about neuroscience. Basically, that's the short version. That's not the summary of the book, but it could be. That was the wall I had to swim through. But we've known forever, through art, through prose, through our ancient texts, that there's an emotional component to our relationship with water. People lined up and paid money to stand in front of paintings like this in Europe. This painting by my late brother, John Imber, who passed away 2 years ago of ALS, he was a great painter and painted all the way to the end. And he loved to paint the coast, loved to paint water. And when he could no longer hold the paintbrush in his right hand, he switched it to his left hand. And we could no longer hold it in his left hand, he put it in his mouth. And eventually they would tape the paintbrush to his head. And he painted this that way, slowly, deliberately, carefully, painted the water in Stonington, Maine. We know that water is medicine, but most of that understanding has been related to hygiene and hydration, right? And we're familiar with that. We're familiar with the chemistry, the physical attributes of water that are important for hydration and hygiene. And that's the bulk of your work, is that hygiene piece, getting that right so that water is safe for people to get into and enjoy. But there's more to it than that. And again, not a new idea, but the science is new. That water calms us. 2,000 years ago, we knew that. Right? I call this the Blue Mind Psalm. To paraphrase, when you're chucking through the Red Mine Valley and there's evil and chaos all around you, find yourself some water and calm down next to it. Soothe your soul by the water. Not a new idea. There's a great photograph of the late Muhammad Ali and a quote from him, just reminding us that water is a theme across all cultures and all spiritual traditions that unites us. It's the place where we strip down and we get together, and you are just simply a human being. Now, we live in an increasingly chaotic world, and I don't need to spend too much time explaining that point. But we're more and more connected, and we're receiving into our brains more and more information. Over the course of the day, it is said, you receive more information than ancient humans received over the course of a year. And that's just getting better or worse, depending on your perspective. Right? Our kids are beginning that at a much higher level than we could ever imagine. Just compare your childhood to the childhood of somebody alive today. Just a lot of information. I wish you could just go in and see the doctor and have them remove the monkey mind and that chatter from your brain and just settle you down. But that's not the way it works. This stress that we deal with, sometimes it's acute, sometimes it's chronic, sometimes it's low level, but it builds up. It's real. More and more research on post-traumatic stress shows how real it in fact is and how debilitating it can be at its most extreme. But we're all dealing at some level with post-traumatic stress. That's something that everybody in this room, everybody outside of this room has or will deal with post-traumatic stress in some way. I call that red mind. And it's normal. Red mind is necessary, normal, and part of our lives. Red mind is what gets you down the road, gets you across the finish line, gets you away from the lion if you hang out with lions and they chase you. That's just what it's part of our lives. You need stress. But you don't need it all the time, all day, every day. When that happens, your body and your mind start to break down. Fortunately, there's a remedy for that. It's called green space and blue space. Right? It doesn't come in a pill. It comes by walking through a door. It comes by getting near, in, on, or under the water. It comes by going out to the park or taking a hike or climbing a mountain or just simply going out and taking a pause in a meadow. Now there's increasing research showing that not just green space but also blue space is good for our brains, therefore good for our bodies. Simply standing in front of an aquarium tank changes our physiology. In fact, even thinking about going and standing in front of that water starts the process of changing our physiology. And you know what I'm talking about. If I say, okay, meet me at the pool in 10 minutes, your brain is already moving towards the water. You're already chemically and physiologically preparing yourself for that moment. The chemistry of your brain begins to change at the mere mention of water, as well as when you see it, hear it, feel it. Now, a book that came out years ago when I was a kid, Jaws, scared the crap out of a lot of people, and they decided they were not going to get in the water for a very long time. And I'm not just talking about the ocean, I'm talking about lakes, rivers, and even pools. People scared to swim across the deep end because of this book. Kind of irrational. Well, I'm hoping that my book is a bit of an antidote to that, a convincer to get people back near, in, on, and underwater, to get them moving in that direction, to overcome the red mind and get wet more. And blue mind can be applied to everything from a glass of water in the morning to something much more vast, say floating at night in a big body of warm water, and everything in between. It's a continuum of water, from little water to big water, from small blue mind to deep blue mind. And you can imagine over the course of your life the various versions of that feeling that you've encountered. Now, the blue mind conversation has begun to intersect with a number of different sectors. There's just a few of them. And I would say the conversation at this conference intersects with every single sector. All of them. You may have noticed there, the way I remember these sectors is this simple acronym that you may have noticed there. That's the way I keep the sectors in mind. Spells out hearts. So blue mind and blue hearts. Now, the New Yorker likes to but display water on their cover. So here's a cover from this past summer. Kids lined up looking through the fence at the water, right? There's another one, people enjoying the water, diving under, swimming around, enjoying the reef. There's one more, the multi-generational aspect of spending time near or in water. And for the pool folks, don't want you to feel left out, there's that one right there. There's a big belly flop. Who's that guy? So the fundamental question is, how has water changed us? And that question, and listening to the answers that people have provided over the recent years since writing Blue Mind, has driven the next part of the conversation. The sequel to Blue Mind is a book, and this is a bit of a sneak peek, and if my publisher was here, they would probably unplug the projector right about now, because I'm not meant to speak about this publicly, but I thought, what the heck? This is friends and family, right? Let's go there. So the 7 ages of water, I want to explain to you quickly. It goes like this. We're born. We're born from water. We've all spent 9 months in that watery womb in the dark. We all did. Prior to that big old egg that your mom had, that was mostly water, right? Then we come out and we're born. Sometimes people are born into a watery environment. It's called water birth. Sometimes they have early water baby experiences. That's a good idea. Done well, done safely and carefully. From birth to stay connected to water. We can learn these techniques very early on. We can learn the skills we need very early on if our parents practice water parenting. What a concept. I was, just as a side note, I was adopted. My water story, my birth story, was one of those black boxes. I had no idea So I made it up. And because I love water so much, I told my adoptive parents that I was a water baby. I was, I'm pretty sure my biological mother, whoever she was, she was in some water when I was born. I just made that up because I saw one of those early Russian water birth videos, with all the, a lot of hairy people in the water giving birth, and, like the 70s, that style, you know what I'm talking about? Yep, you remember those. And I was like, yep, that's the way my mom did that, and that's why I love the water. So the next age of water is play. Incredibly important. Our brains grow and learn and develop through play. Play in water is some of the best kind. So keep that in mind as we're, thinking about play. And play is a lifelong activity, but especially important for young people. Being out in the water and celebrating it, whether it's the first rain of the year or singing and stomping together or celebrating in fountains and just, abstract, jazzy play. That's what play is all about, invention and imagination. It's about getting out there and learning new things, falling down, standing up, and just to keep moving. This is not what I'm talking about. This is what we're up against. And fortunately, these devices still don't like water very much. You know what I'm talking about. It's getting close here. It's kind of touch and go. Samsung, kind of be careful there. But we want people to log out, turn off, and get wet. That's one of the places we can go to still play. The next age of water, one of the three kind of middle ages of adulthood, it's called the lover. It's when we fall in love with each other. We fall in love with big ideas. We fall in love with who we are. We start to figure out what we're passionate about. Great scene from Titanic. Remember that film? They fall in love with the water all around them. They make it across the ocean. They get married. They have kids. Live happily ever after. That's kind of that story, right? It's lovely. That's my alternative ending that could have goes much better with the story of Blue Mind. The awe we get from nature is profound. The feeling of awe and wonder. That scene from that movie, From Here to Eternity, I don't know if people remember that, but a scandalous moment in cinematic history right there. There's a lot of backstory I won't go into, but that was a scandalous film. And a memorable one. But I just ask you, take that scene, if you remember, just that photograph, and remove the water. Very passionate moment, lovers on the beach. And remove the water. And what do you have? Two people in their underwear rolling around in the dirt. Doesn't work for me. I don't know. Not going to win an Academy Award. Bring the water back. It's sexy, it's hot, it's scandalous, it wins the awards. We're still talking about it. Take the water, back to rolling around in the dirt. Not so good. Even frogs. Something about water is romantic, it's sexy, it's the lubricant of love, if you will. It's super important. And, I proposed to my wife underwater. We got married next to the ocean, and we honeymooned by the water. And I think you could probably tell some version of that story in your life. Water as a backdrop to your most romantic moments, to the deepest passions in your life. So we fall in love with people, we fall in love with places, we fall in love with ideas, and then we fight for those ideas. But in order to fight, we need to love. So those two things go together. I gave a commencement address at DePauw University back in 2010, where I went to college. And we talked about being lovers and fighters, not lovers or fighters, but both. You fight for what you love. And in our case, we fight for water. We fight for people. We fight for access. Steph Curry, he fights for three-pointers, three-point shots in his basketball team. He's a warrior, Golden State Warriors. And to manage his stress, he floats. Every other week, goes down into San Francisco, and he floats. Calms his mind. Helps his game. Oops. This is Martin Pollock. He was a warrior. He served in the Middle East, came home missing one arm and both legs. He thought his life was over. He thought he was going to spend the rest of it like as he said, as a blob on a bar stool with his mates. He's a British guy. But he got involved in Operation Surf, and now he's a surf and water ambassador, inspiring people all over the world through his surfing ability and his bravery and his courage. Back here in the water, he decided, I want to live large, I want to do things. And he's been doing it ever since. Many examples of men and women that inspire us in that similar way. Then we get to the age that I call the justice, and that's kind of where most of us are in our lives right now. Responsibility, decisions. You're taking care of your business, you're taking care of your clients, you're taking care of your family. People are coming to you for advice, the weight of the world. You're making decisions one way or another every day, all day. That is a huge responsibility, and it's tiring. We need to understand how to balance those things. We need to understand how to teach that balance and make wise decisions, because we are the ones that people are asking for wisdom from. We have to understand that water, wealth, contentment, and health all go together, as they knew in Modesto, California, when they built this archway. As they knew when they built these fountains in front of the Seagram building in New York City. An interesting thing about this is the architect, whose name is Mies, famous architect, built this plaza, and that wall where you see people sitting, he didn't plan on people to sit on it. He actually planned on people to not sit on it. It was a decorative element. But it's one of the most favored places to sit during lunch, during breaks in New York City, right there on that wall. People shimmy out on that wall. It's not set up safely, but people want to sit there and look out on the water. So the architect didn't even realize that would be a place where people would sit. But they do. They want to sit by the water. In summer 2003, we did a long walk down the California coast. We took a sabbatical, and we walked from Oregon to Mexico and camped the whole way down the coast. And as we were going through Del Mar, California, we passed this little bungalow. It was for sale. And I stopped and got the flyer. This is my friend Jeannie holding the flyer. So summer 2003, 800 square foot bungalow on the beach in Del Mar, California. What do you think the asking price was those 13 years ago? Nailed it. $6.3 million asking price. In real estate terms, that would be considered a teardown. I think that's what they call them. $6.3 million for the privilege and the joy of being able to hear the ocean from your bedroom and wake up and walk straight out to the sand. We value water incredibly. Now, not everybody's going to live in the front row, but we need to think about that in how we design access to water, how we design our pools. So here's a little Zillow study from 2014. Waterfront properties, on average, are double in value. And that's not just the California coast. Now, you can zoom in on that one stretch of coast in Del Mar and see it's 1,000% premium from the second row to the front row. Wow, that's 1,000% premium. That's the biggest financial transaction of one's life, is the premium on top of the value of the house. Think about that. And if you ask those people, what are you paying for? They're paying for a feeling. That's $1 trillion premium for a feeling. That's not insignificant. If you add it all up, we want that feeling. We're willing to pay for it. How does that influence the way you work your industry? It influences it greatly. People want access to good water where they can recreate and get their blue mind on. Now, this is not just a coastal conversation. It's a water conversation. It's the lakes, rivers, oceans, waterways, pools, tubs, spas, float centers, inclusively, across our nation. We need to be talking about this. Pharrell Williams. I was hoping you'd play Pharrell Williams rather than Andre 3000, but maybe save that one for later. He says he discovered his love of music in water. And what did he do with that love? Well, quite a bit. He wrote that Happy song and a few others. He's made a career out of his creativity that he says he got from the water. His imagination ran wild. Think about that. You are the gatekeepers to imagination. The late, great Oliver Sacks, great neurologist, who's a mentor and an inspiration for Blue Mind. Avid swimmer, swam all the way up to the end. He said he got his best ideas, and he had a lot of winner ideas throughout his career. He got his best ideas in the water. He kept a pad, a notebook, on the deck of the pool, on the picnic table by the lake, so that he could hop out and jot things down. His poor editor sometimes had to read his soggy notes and decipher them, and sometimes there were water blotches and ink all over the place, and she had to figure that out based on his ideas that came from the water. Very interesting. Some of the great thinkers think near and in water. Increasing research on floating, just simply floating, and not just in float centers, but just floating in a pool, floating in a lake, floating down a river, floating in the ocean, relaxing, is good treatment, good medicine for anxiety. The work that's happening right now in Tulsa, Oklahoma with Dr. Justin Feinstein, I highly recommend you dig into his work, and I can send you more information about his efforts. State-of-the-art neuroscience lab doing cutting-edge research on our bodies in water. There's this crazy inventor in Japan named Nakamatsu, Dr. Nakamatsu. He holds 3,300 patents. You can read about him in Smithsonian Magazine. He's a little bit of a nut, but he says he gets his best ideas holding his breath at the bottom of the pool. Claims to have patented the floppy disk, among other things. Now, we know that green space is good for our brains, good for our bodies. There's that's been studied for a long time. But so is blue space, and that has not been studied for nearly as long. Spending time near, in, on, underwater is good for our bodies and our minds, for mental health. Check out the research of Dr. Matt White at the University of Exeter Medical School in their work on blue health. There you go. This is not a competition between pharmaceuticals and alternative therapies. It's a collaboration. We know many people with post-traumatic stress that are able to dial down their treatment, dial down the dosage, and replace it with water therapy, or complement it with water therapy. Instead of taking 12 or 13 different drugs, they're down to 2, and they're not taking as much. So the side effects drop, and they supplement with time spent in the water. We know it works. The second to last age is what I call ebb and flow. That's sort of as you go into your retirement years and gravity starts to take its toll a bit. You need water ever more for therapy, right? Gravity feels heavier. Your knees don't feel as strong. Your hips might need to be replaced. And in the process of doing that, water is your friend. We know a lot about the health impacts, the physical health impacts of spending time in water, right? There's research on the posters outside. Various treatments, various illnesses and diseases that are helped. I won't use the word cured, but certainly helped by spending time in water. The therapeutic use of pools and baths and wild waterways is well known. But it also extends to our mental health because 60% of our diseases and illnesses and disorders are related to stress in our society. 60%. So if we can reduce stress just a little bit from a lot of lives, that's a huge, huge public health impact. It's massive. Even if you can nudge that 1% through restoring a waterway or building a public pool or increasing access, that's a huge gain. This is Jarmila. She spent about a decade in a nursing home. She's a retired professor from UCLA. And my friend Greg visited her and said, Jarmila, what do you want to do? She said, I want to see the ocean again. And she was in Santa Monica, not far from the ocean. He took her to the Santa Monica Pier, and she stood up, shuffled forward, got out of her wheelchair, grabbed the railing, and just had a great moment, just standing there looking at her beloved ocean. And Greg said, Jarmila, I didn't know that you could stand, let alone walk a step or two. She said, I haven't had anything worth walking to in a long time. And I think a lot of our aging population is probably in a similar situation. They would love to get out and get into the water. Many people who have spent their lives near, in, on, and underwater, who are dry right now, would love that opportunity. Young ones as well. So diseases affects us at all ages. We're now able to take these ideas and turn them into virtual reality. And it works as pain remediation for men, women, young and old, dealing with a whole range of disorders and diseases. Think about that. Now, if it works with digital water, of course it works with real water, right? It's harder to bring the dolphins into the hospital room, real ones, with the ocean to boot. But we can bring the digital VR version. But then we can get out there. It's a reminder that let's not just lean on the technology. Let's lean on the real thing. So here's the message, that the physical benefits of water are well known by your community. But there are also vast cognitive, emotional, psychological, social, and spiritual benefits. And we've created a statement, a short statement that's been signed by over 100 leaders in health, wellness, and water. And I invite any of you to log on and send us an endorsement if you'd like your organization or your name listed endorsing that statement. Our goal is to change legislation, to see these ideas show up in the Clean Water Act, in all of our policies, in all of our conversations. So my challenge to you is, do not write another report, give another talk, publish another newsletter without including this reality, that what you do has all of these benefits, all of them, well documented, and I'll send any references that anybody might be interested in. So the final age of water is death. And not a topic people are necessarily comfortable talking about, but certainly one that we all are going to deal with one way or another. When my father passed away, we naturally gravitated to the water to memorialize him. He was a water guy, and so it made sense. We didn't even discuss it. We didn't even think about it. We just went there. This is Fountain Hills, Arizona. Tallest continually operating fountain in the world. And the reason I can spout that off is my dad was the mayor of the town. He made me memorize that phrase right there. I'll say it again. Tallest continually operating fountain in the world. Yeah. We get together and mourn and remember, memorialize, cry, celebrate, laugh when we think about our loved ones. And water is a really good place to do it, because it provides us with a sense of solitude, privacy, and those are things that are increasingly diminished in this busy world. Privacy. Remember that. Remember that idea. Remember really, really feeling like you're having a private conversation? Well, water is one place you can still go to do that. Nostalgia. Water connects us back to some of our best, deepest memories. It's a place of reconciliation. It's a great backdrop and context for reconciliation, for resolving conflicts. And it's a place that boosts resiliency, our ability to bounce back when we fall down, to get up and keep going, resilience. Water is a tool for resilience, for ourselves, for our communities, for our teams, for our kids. And the core component to all of this is access. Without access, none of this exists. And you are in the access business. If water is polluted, we lose access. If you go to the beach and that's what you find, an oil spill, no more blue mind. That's red mind. If you go to the beach and you spend your time cleaning up trash, that's red mind. That's not blue mind. That's frustrating. If you go to the pool and it's closed for whatever reason, whatever contamination may have occurred or adjustment that needs to happen, that's a sad day. That sign, when you see that sign, I know it well. You're ready. You've prepared yourself to get in that water, and you get there, and boom, it may as well look like that. It may as well look like a red pool when you see that closed sign. Have you ever gone swimming in a red pool? That's kind of weird, isn't it? Never thought about that, but turn the water red and suddenly it's like the signal to your brain is, don't go in there. I'm not going swimming in there. Privatization is the other P that keeps us from having access. When the gate is locked because somebody owns the water and it's not available to anyone, it's just the owner. That limits our blue mine. This is a big case in California where a Silicon Valley billionaire is trying to keep people off of a beach. Complicated, to say the least, but certainly part of the conversation. And then the third P, third of three, is perception. This perception, Jarmila perceived that she couldn't go to the water, and so she didn't. But then she was asked, and she did. She had the perception that it was not available. We have warnings that water can be dangerous, and sometimes it is, and we need to heed those warnings. But sometimes those are imaginary walls. Sometimes it's a cultural perception. Sometimes we're told we're not allowed to go in the water because of the color of our skin. That still occurs. There are places in the world where women aren't allowed to surf because the color of their skin and their gender. Think of that. We enjoy incredible freedoms. In some places, those freedoms are not part of normal life. There are projects that are breaking those barriers down and bringing kids to the water, breaking through those barriers, getting those kids with proper instruction and safety measures into the water. My friend Carlos in Mozambique, he grew up and he was told, Carlos, we don't go in the ocean. We go on boats, we go fishing, but nobody goes in the ocean. And he said, yeah, but I want to. And they said, no, we don't, it's dangerous. There's stuff in there. We don't go in, we don't swim, we don't go under, we don't dive. He said, yeah, but I want to. So Carlos became the first PADI-certified dive master in Mozambique. And now he's teaching others, and there's a generation of divers and Mozambican dive masters. There were outsiders who were divers, but first, and he goes to the communities, the tribes, and gives talks to kids and turns them on to their water in their backyard. He's a hero. He's swimming through walls. And one more story about Harvey Welch in Carbondale, Illinois, who grew up in Carbondale. And I have a short video. I'll save it for one of the workshops in the interest of time. And Harvey grew up at a time when he wasn't allowed to swim in the pool. He didn't learn to swim in the pool. And he played on the SIU basketball team. He served in the Army, had a great career, academically, professionally, and as an athlete. Lives in Carbondale still. He is a leader in the Parks and Rec department. And his dream was to build a pool for everybody, a public swimming pool. And that public pool just opened in May after 40 years of effort. And it's a beautiful facility. And some of the people here, including Kevin's firm, were involved in the creation of that pool. It opened in May, and everybody who wants to learn to swim can learn to swim. Now, you may say, okay, well, that's great, a pool in Carbondale. We build a lot of pools. Carbondale is surrounded by world-class waterways, lakes, and rivers. Really, truly biodiverse, special places. If you don't know how to swim, the idea of getting in a kayak or canoe is pretty scary. But if you know how to swim, and that sounds like a good idea, a kayak becomes a tool for exploration. So I'll save this video for the workshop. There's a great report that came out last week on WGN in Chicago about the success of the community in Carbondale, breaking down those barriers. There's a movement happening right now in our country, around the world, to get more people in the water, breaking down barriers, swimming through walls, inspiring young people of all ages, classes, races, backgrounds, to embrace their blue mind, to understand that being in the water is part of being human. And so the question is, what are we going to do differently? as a result of this conversation? Where are we going to take it? Let's remember that water is life, but it also makes life worth living. Without water, there's no life. But when we have water, it isn't just for hygiene and hydration. It isn't just for recreation. It's for mental wellness. When we undervalue water, we lose it. We despoil it. We lose access in all three of those ways. And water is medicine, both for our physical bodies and our mental health. Simple idea, ancient idea, now backed up with modern science. And we need access for everyone, right? Our dream, I think our collective dream, is that every child knows how to swim and enjoys it and can be safe near and on and underwater. That's a big dream. It's maybe one, we've got a lot of imaginary walls between us where we're sitting right now in that dream. But I think we can swim through those walls. So throughout the next couple of days with my colleague Bruckner, we'll have some workshops. In those workshops, it won't be this. It won't be me talking to you. It'll be you talking to each other and working through how to tell this story better, powerfully, through your personal life and through your business life. How to reframe the way you talk about water. How to bring some of this new science to the forefront of how you communicate internally with your team and externally with the world around you. We'll talk about finding and telling your new water story, and then go deeper into going deeper. So that was a lot of information, a lot of words, a lot of stories, a lot of people I introduced you to, maybe some new concepts, maybe some old ones that just you've been reminded of. My hope, as I said before, is that you no longer communicate in any way outwardly without including this part of the story. Because when we leave it out, we're saying one of three things. Either it doesn't exist, it's not important, or we're clueless. And none of those three things are true. You're informed, this is real, and it's extremely important. So let's build this part of the story into the way we talk about this group, this movement, this industry, and take it forward. So that's my message, and thank you very much. I hope to see you at some of the workshops throughout the day.